Most will never hear this, but you're not like most. There is a book the prophets buried, too dangerous, too divine, the Book of Giants, a record of celestial rebellion and a bloodline not meant to survive Eden. These were not myths. These were corruptions in flesh, echoes of fallen vibration, sons of angels, daughters of earth. And when the watchers wept, it was already too late. Hidden beneath the sands and censored by kings, this ancient chronicle was torn from divine law because it reveals who you really are. But O child of light, are you ready to remember what heaven tried to forget? They didn't erase the truth. They buried it beneath belief, burned it beneath temple stone, decreed its silence in the tongues of new empires, and smothered it under cannon like ash over a flame still breathing. The Book of Giants was not forgotten. It was made to be forgotten. It begins in echoes, scraps torn from scrolls, half-breaths of a long silence. Discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran, caves its fragments slept in the bedrock of the Judean desert, waiting for a generation bold enough to hear what it was never supposed to speak again. A brother text to one Enoch. The Book of Giants told a tale too immense, too heretical, too ancient for Rome, for Babylon, for Ecclesia. It traced the bloodline of rebellion, from the watchers who fell from the heavens to their monstrous sons who shattered the spine of earth itself. In the 3rd century BCE, Enochic literature moved in the currents of Jewish mysticism. The Book of Watchers was revered among the Essenes, but the Book of Giants, with its blasphemous pedigree, was whispered, not read. And yet it survived, in Aramaic, in Manichaean fragments from Turfan in western China, even echoing in Islamic and Mandean traditions. Survival not by sanction but by haunting. Let the silence expose itself. For what power fears most is not myth, it is memory. Giants once walked the earth, not only in bone but symbol, embodiment of forbidden union. In the Book of Giants, names like Ahia and Hahia, sons of the rebel watcher Shemiheza, roamed the cursed world, hunted by revelation, tormented by nightmares of annihilation. Their dreams, preserved in those ancient scraps, speak of heavenly tablets of judgment already written. And for this celestial indictment, the book was scourged from history. By the time the biblical canon was sealed under rabbinic and Christian authority, anything that carried Enoch's keys was locked out. We find no trace in the Torah, no echo in Paul's epistles. Only in the Epistle of Jude, a single verse dares to cite Enoch's prophecy. One verse, surrounded by silence. Why? Because the Book of Giants dares to speak of a war that started in the heavens but infected the earth. Not with sin, but with hybridity, a transgression of boundaries, an unlawful fusion of divine and human, of light torn from order. This wasn't myth. This was a retelling of the prehistory that empires could not stomach. It threatened theology. It threatened structure. It threatened control. Texts like these were burned by decree. The church fathers called them wild. The rabbis assigned them to demons. Synods wrote them out with ink and law. Mani, the prophet of light in 3rd century Persia, treasured it, and for this his followers were hunted. The Manichaean version of the Book of Giants wandered through Asia, branded heresy at every shore it touched. But the truth escapes in fragments, through caves, through ashes, through half-forgotten names groaning beneath archaeological dust. The book isn't gone. It's buried, not just in clay jars, but in consciousness, in symbols that sleep in our dreams, in the fear of something lost before history, something we once knew but no longer name. So I ask you, if their story was nothing, why has it been so violently erased? What memory are you carrying that was forbidden to awaken? In the beginning, the giants fell, not from heaven but from memory. Their names once roared through the bones of mountains, now they whisper from beneath broken tablets and vanishing scrolls. The Book of Giants is not gone. It is scattered, sifted like ash through centuries of smoldering silence, torn pages lodged in the deep sleep of desert caves. Buried not by time but by intent, we do not forget so selectively by accident. This is not neglect. This is manufacture. This is Babel's aftershock. Each absence hums. Each omission is a note struck in a cathedral that no longer stands. The silence is tuned, engineered, shaped like a knife. Somewhere between the burning of the Library of Alexandria and the palimpsests scraped clean in Byzantine scriptoriums, the giants lost their voices, and so did you. Found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran's cave 4 fragments of an ancient apocalypse gnash like teeth through the centuries. The Book of Giants emerged beside the Book of Enoch, its celestial twin. Yet unlike Enoch, which walked the edge of canon, the giants were burned from the record. Their story, too volatile, too real. A saga where heaven's rebellion is not a metaphor but a genealogy. The Book of Giants dared to remember what others were ordered to forget, that there was a time when angels came down not to guard but to corrupt. When the heavens seated giants and the earth groaned under their sin. The oldest traces reach back to the Aramaic texts, where the names of the monstrous Nephilim and their watcher fathers still bleed through. Ahia Gilgamesh, not as myths but as condemned testimonies. Gilgamesh, not the hero of Sumer but a hybrid of divine transgression. A name carried across Babylon and rebranded to hide its roots. The Book of Giants dares to include such figures. It dares to name them. That wasn't just dangerous, it was heresy. When Mani, the Persian prophet of the 3rd century, resurrected the Book of Giants into Manichaean scripture, he resurrected fire around his feet. His retelling fused Zoroastrian cosmology with the bones of Enoch's vision. The giants became the vessels of darkness disembodied after death, their spirits roaming as demons. The church would not have it. Rome-sanctioned councils declared what was sacred and what was subversion. The Book of Giants was not rejected for being false. It was rejected for being too close to forbidden origin. It did not fit their story, and so it was cast out, not debated, deleted. But fire does not forget, nor does sand. Cave 4 held onto its pieces like a grave clutches bones. And in the sands of Turfan and the parchment of scattered monasteries it continues to whisper. History tried to snuff it out, yet here it is, in broken Aramaic. In Manichaean fragments rescued from Turfan ruins. In the footnotes of angels and the silence between Genesis 6:4 and everything they didn't say. Because they knew. The council knew. The scribes knew. Even Augustine knew when he warned of the so-called sons of God. In his City of God, he named them, carefully cloaking meaning in metaphor, and still the truth cracked through. They knew that in those silenced lines lay a charge too electric for empire to cage. Not just myth, but origin. Not just error, but echo. They knew that memory once stirred becomes prophecy. The question isn't why the Book of Giants was erased. The real question, is what wakes in us. When we remember what we were commanded to forget, and still they watch from below. They did not burn the Book of Giants because it was false. They burned it because it was too true, too radiant, too dangerous, too loud with memory the kings could not dull. This was not the whisper of myth. This was testimony, blackened by decree, buried beneath centuries of crown-forged silence. Once it walked freely among the sacred texts carried in the mouths of prophets and mystics who had not yet bowed to empire. Before dogma ossified, before canon became cage, the giants lived, in ink, in breath, in fear. But then came the architects of order, the Babylonian scribes, the Sanhedrin's guardians, the ecumenical councils who laced parchment with politics. And with them came the purge. Not of fables, but of firebrands. The Book of Giants told stories that empires could not afford to remember. Stories of celestial rebellion, of divine mishaps, of bloodlines not blessed but broken. It did not flatter the heavens, it exposed the cracks. The text likely birthed in Second Temple Judaism's apocalyptic imagination, possibly as early as the 3rd century BCE, was a companion to the Book of Enoch, which itself was cast out of the Hebrew canon despite its reverence among early Christians and Ethiopian Orthodox mystics. In fragments recovered from Qumran's Cave 4 and 6, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we catch shadows Mawe the giant flying beyond the known world to seek a prophet's word, the watchers weeping as judgment nears, and Enoch distant and severe delivering divine verdict like thunder etched into stone. But power hates prophecy, especially when it unveils forbidden bloodlines, when it names the sins of angels and maps their monstrous fruit. The Damascus document, one of the scrolls of Qumran, accuses those who reject divine wisdom of walking in the stubbornness of their heart. One could hear that same stubbornness in the silence that swallowed the Book of Giants, not a silence of ignorance, but of design. These weren't accidental omissions. These were surgical exclusions inflicted by councils and theologians who understood too well the threat posed by unfiltered revelation. Rome didn't need giants disrupting its heavenly chain of command. Judea couldn't tether its covenant to cosmic scandal, and the Church, now entangling eternity with empire, wouldn't risk an origin story soaked in angelic rebellion and unsanctioned hybrid behemoths. So they struck it from memory, first softly, then savagely, a slow erasure cloaked in righteousness carried out in smoke and script, until the only remnants were fragments buried beneath desert ash in languages few could read, in vaults fewer still could access. But the memory, oh, the memory lingered, half recalled in Manichaean scripture, flashed like lightning in the visions of medieval mystics, echoed in the tortured metaphors of Dante and the divine wrath of Milton. Even the Quran in Surah al-Furqan whispers of ancient peoples taller in stature whose end came swiftly. Echoes, my brothers, echoes, my sisters, shadows of a truth kings could not fully kill. For what is burned is not always destroyed. Some fires purify, some awaken the ash. And some like this, conceal embers beneath centuries awaiting breath. And now you must ask, what kind of truth must you fear so greatly that you must set fire to the testimony itself? What story did the rulers erase? Because if you remembered it, you might never bow again. And if they feared its return, what does that say of the truth that sleeps still just beneath your remembering? And still they watch from below. Memory does not die quietly. It is dragged into the dust-kicking, clawing whispering. And somewhere, beneath the sandstone weight of forgotten caves and the shattered ink of outlawed scrolls, a once holy tremor still shakes the bones of silence. The Book of Giants wasn't simply lost. It was deliberately dismembered. They tell you it vanished by accident, a casualty of time. But scrolls like these don't vanish. They are silenced. They are set aflame, buried under imperial decree, and suffocated beneath theological convenience. Their echoes don't fade. They are smothered, not forgotten, forbidden. The Book of Giants was part of the Enochic tradition, an extension of the Book of Enoch, that ghost text revered in ancient Ethiopia but exiled from the Western canon. It once walked in the same breath as Genesis, threading through early Jewish mysticism and pre-Christian visions. Found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran, Cave 1, Cave 4, its fragments whispered of mighty beings and their celestial crimes. But even there it came in pieces, torn, tattered, incomplete, a rupture in the archive, as if history itself recoiled from its remembrance. Stone tablets could carry law, but this was a transmission of rebellion, a map of divine miscegenation, a blueprint etched in broken skies and shattered oaths. In the scraps we have fallen watchers mourn the judgment hanging over them. Giants birthed a forbidden union dream of doom. In one torn fragment, the giant Mahue journeys to ask Enoch, the scribe of heaven, for prophecy. This Mahue appears again and again, reaching from the world of corrupted flesh toward the realm of divine justice. It is not allegory, it is lament, the kind that comes only when one remembers what should never have been forgotten. But memory, when carried by those unfit for empire, is dangerous currency. By the 2nd century, the Book of Giants slips into fireless silence. It disappears from the rabbinic traditions that codified Judaism during the era of the Mishnah. The Christian fathers too turn their gaze elsewhere. Even Tertullian, who defended the Book of Enoch as sacred scripture, could not preserve the giant's tale amid the tightening grip of orthodoxy. This isn't neglect, it's strategy. For who benefits from a tale where angels fall for mortal flesh, where hybrids threaten the very balance of creation, and where heaven sends dreams of annihilation? The Persian Manichaeans picked up the trail. They preserved a version in Middle Persian where giants war and fall and weep, a tale that bloomed not in Jerusalem but in the fire temples of Iran. Mani, that haunting prophet of light and shadow, declared the story essential. A cosmic key, a secret history encoded in sorrow. And yet again it fell to the edge of annihilation, hunted down by Zoroastrian kings, then Christian empires, then Islamic dominions, trampled beneath creeds that feared what would not stay buried. History doesn't just forget texts like these, it is taught to forget. What remains now are fragments, broken shards of parchment and carbon soot hiding the size of ancient scribes. Scribes who knew they copied the last copy, who carved glyphs into fragile scrolls knowing that fire and empire would come for them, who etched with trembling hands as if the very letters might scream. And even now you must ask yourself, what truth in this scroll was so volcanic, so unacceptable that it had to be buried beneath the very deserts it once warned us would groan beneath the weight of giants? What memory survives, when memory itself is the danger? And still, they whisper from below. They say angels do not bleed, but what of those who fell? The Book of Giants is not mythology. It is memory made dangerous, choked out by fire, censored by decree, buried intentionally beneath the ash of civilizations that dared not name what birthed their empires. The text was once vast, a thunderous register of forbidden unions and monstrous offspring echoing alongside Enoch in ancient scrolls. But now, only fragments, dust-veiled remnants pulled from the caves of Qumran. Scraps trembling with truth exiled from canon not because they lied, but because they revealed too much. This book, once paired with the Book of Enoch, dared to speak of the Watcher's divine beings who abandoned their post on high to descend upon the daughters of men. Found within the Aramaic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Giants explodes with heretical clarity. Giants named Ahia and Hahia confess visions of coming doom, dreams of celestial retaliation. The heavens prepare their flood, and the text dares to listen. It names too much. It names what flesh came from starlight, names what lineages the angels left behind. Yet it was not merely forgotten, it was silenced systematically, absented from Jewish canon, rejected by Roman orthodoxy, crushed under the rise of institutional theologies from Nicaea to Nag Hammadi. When Mani, founder of the Manichaean tradition, revived the Book of Giants in the 3rd century, weaving it into his cosmology empire, branded him a heretic. His followers were hunted and burned. The book followed, charred parchment, smoke in cathedrals. By the 5th century it disappears again. But silence is not absence, it reverberates. And in the inky quiet of blackened scrolls and broken languages, something survived. Echoes that could not be buried beneath creed. Their pulse can still be felt, in Mesopotamian flood myths, in the cryptic layers of Genesis, in the vibrations between the letters of Hebrew and the silences of Aramaic script. Why would a tale be erased so fiercely, unless it told the one truth that could not be tamed? You were never meant to read the whispers from fallen stars. You were never meant to know of the hybrid blood that walked the earth before the flood. Not metaphor, not myth, but a mythic memory embedded deep within collective soul. Genesis 6:4 dares to reference them, the Nephilim. The sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. A single verse pregnant with apocalypse, surrounded by centuries of silence. Why does every empire fear the giants? Why does every priesthood lock away the watchers? Because the Book of Giants does not simply reveal beings. It unravels architectures, theocracy, hierarchy, heavenly law. If the divine can fall, if angels can sire monsters, then the boundary between heaven and earth is not vertical but violated. And so the scrolls were scattered, intentionally. Atlantis of parchment, not just a flood but a drowning of memory, not just a fire but a ritual of forgetting. Their obliteration was not loss, it was control. But here, the unspoken heresy fragments still speak, not loudly, not legibly, but vibrationally, like bone memory humming in dream time. They call to the chosen, not by doctrine but by resonance. If you are hearing this now, perhaps you are not reading history. Perhaps you are remembering exile. Perhaps something in you still aches for names lost in cinders. Who told you this story was over? Who benefits if you never trace your bloodline back to stars that fell, and still, they watch from below? When the earth groaned underfoot, it wasn't metaphor, it was memory. The kind that fractures mountains, peels the bark from trees, and makes the rivers run backwards. This was no birth cry. It was creation recoiling from what it had been made to carry. Towering, malformed children of cosmic rebellion, the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen stars and mortal wombs, walked the land like gods made of hunger. Their existence wasn't a tale. It was a crisis in the flesh. This was the world the Book of Giants tried to remember, and the world the canon tried to forget. In the fragments recovered from the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea, caves that whispered what cathedrals would not say, we find traces of a story too large for comfortable religion. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls 4Q 530, one of many torn pages of the Book of Giants bleeds sorrow and warning. Here it is Mahue, a giant born of fallen watchers seeking answers in dreams, in silence, in the high places. He journeys across the sky realm to speak with Enoch, the scribe of judgment, because even monsters sense the storm long before it breaks. These weren't just brutal titans they dreamed. They wept. And those cries shook the dirt beneath them, for the earth itself was not indifferent. The Book of Enoch, in its first section, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, though scorned in the West, declares in chapter 7 verse 5, "Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. The soil became a witness. The ground itself rebelled against its unnatural burden. The giants consumed all that lived, beast, man, bird, even the flora of Eden's touch. Hunger without boundary, power without covenant." The Midrash in rabbinic tradition tells us that their fall wasn't merely celestial, it was terrestrial desecration. They trampled the holy grooves of creation, blotting purpose with appetite. Generation was turned inside out. The earth was not just groaning, it was caving in. And beneath the weight of their steps lay lines fractured like snapped harp strings. Violence was their grammar. Implosion their language. Cities fell before cities could be named, and the heavens watched with cracked breath. Angels once seduced by mortal beauty now trembled at what their desire had spawned. This perhaps is why the book disappeared, not by chance but by necessity, because it dared to convey that evil wasn't born from ignorance but from knowledge misused, from wisdom turned godless. It wasn't just a deluge, it was an erasure. A deliberate flood, engineered silence cloaked in thunder. The flood tells us not only what was punished, but what powers feared would rise again. The suppression wasn't about fantasy, it was about fear. What if humanity remembered that the sky once loved the earth too much, and that from that love came ruin, so the councils erased it, the clergy buried it, and still the ruins breathe? Tell me, can you feel it? Beneath your very feet, the echo of beings too large for myth, too painful for doctrine. They called them fallen, they called them giants, but what they were and what they did was more than the earth could carry. And still, they watch from below. It was not a myth, it was a verdict. The Book of Giants didn't end, it was sentenced. Sentenced to exile by decree not of man alone, but of principalities that whispered through empires and pulpits alike. What you hold in fragments today, brittle parchment ink faded by time and fear, was once a thundering judgment scratched across the heavens and pressed into the bones of mountains. It spoke of hybrid bloodlines, divine rebellion, and the price of unholy knowledge. And because it told what should not be remembered, they made damn sure you would forget. This was not mere censorship. This was ritual obliteration. Flames were summoned to the libraries. Scrolls unrolled only to vanish in ash. The Zoroastrian echoes of the Mahabad, the Babylonian laments of long-haired giants, even the Aramaic fragments buried at Qumran, all carried this sentence, one delivered not just against angels and their monstrous sons, but against the very telling of their existence. The act of remembrance became a crime. In the Tigris night, scribes wept as their ink was outlawed. In Antioch's spire, chants once vibrated with forbidden verses. Now only silence lingers in the geometry of shattered mosaics. The Dead Sea Scrolls give us only shards of the war names like Maui and Gilgamesh appear not as heroes but haunted limbs of celestial crime. In the extant pieces found in Cave 4, the giants speak of dreams of annihilation, roused not by human fear but by divine consequence. Their dreams trembled the heavens, and it is their confessions that cost the book its place in daylight. Because it was never heresy, it was evidence. The Book of Giants reveals that the Watchers, those divine beings fallen from the heights mentioned in the Book of Enoch, not only rebelled but bred, and their offspring were not anomalies, they were regimes. Rulers of ruin, terrors of terrain. And when the decree came down, when the archangels were dispatched and the heavens sharpened their wrath, the judgment wasn't against a few unruly spirits. It was against a system of corruption passed down in body and blood. A distortion woven into the latticework of earth and lineage. And so came the punishment, cosmic, inevitable, terrifying. The text speaks of the archangel Raphael binding Azazel, casting him into darkness beneath the desert rocks. It recounts Uriel warning Noah of an impending flood that the giants would not survive. This punishment, the deluge, the divine purge, was not just about cleansing the earth but resetting the covenant of memory. What was remembered had to be reburied. What was witnessed had to be silenced. The cloud, the stone, nature itself would bear the seal of judgment. Even the calendar would be rewritten to forget. But what survives hides in symbol. Gilgamesh, once king of Uruk, appears again, not just as legend, but as possible remnant. The Babylonian epic may mask the same beings the Book of Giants accuses, half-divines walking among men, shaping cities, forging pride from the dust they were born to dominate. The Enochic text refers to him directly, fragmented but unmistakable. And if this is true, if these echoes line up, then the Book of Giants was not apocalyptic fantasy. It was case law for the cosmos, divine precedent for what happens when power violates heaven's design. So we ask, was the flood just a flood, or was it the sound of truth being buried under water and time? And if the sentence was etched in cloud and stone, who was it meant to be read by? Are you remembering now? And still, they watch from below. Some scrolls were never meant to walk on dry land. They were born in flame, buried in salt, and carried not in hands, but in remembrance. The Book of Giants whispered in the dreaming earth and stitched into broken parchment floated over floods and fell into silence not from time but trial. It is not gone. It is hiding. The last time it dared to speak it was cast out, branded heresy by the keepers of official memory. Condemned not because it lied, but because it told too much truth. A tale unfit for synods, unclean for altars. Because it remembered the bloodline of angels, the hunger of their offspring, and the secret conversations of heaven. That kind of remembering is dangerous. Found only in fragments, scraped from the sands of Qumran in the 20th century, the Book of Giants rose from the grave. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, its voice broke the hushed names of the Nephilim, dreams of doom, a council of fallen stars, reverberating with echoes of one Enoch, and with strange reflections in Manichaean texts discovered in Turfan China. Yes, China. The truth fled far to survive. It spoke names scholars dared not utter aloud. Ahia and Hahia, the sons of Shemiheza, dreaming of cosmic reckoning. Giants wrestling with premonitions of their own destruction. They did not speak in riddles, they remembered. And those who listened, those who dared to record, were scattered like the text itself, across sandstorms and persecutions. And yet, the scrolls endured. How did they survive fire? Not just the literal flame in Antioch and Alexandria, but the metaphysical fire decrees of councils, papal condemnations, the silent redaction of canons. The Second Temple period gave it breath, but the rising tide of orthodoxy snuffed it out. The manuscript of the Watchers was allowed to whisper. The Book of Giants, it was strangled. No exile is accidental. Erasure is theology practiced as architecture. Whole libraries burned to the ground to blot out a single sentence. Think of the Library of Celsus. Think of the ash that once fell like snow over Pergamon. Think of the breath held in catacombs where memory went underground. But memory is a vessel. It floated across deserts, through ruins smuggled by mystics and heretics. The Manichaeans took it east when Rome branded Mani and heretic. In their version, the fallen ones were not just rogue angels. They were cosmic engineers twisting creation. Mani called them archons. The rebellion was spiritual and biological. The scroll swam across worlds, but always underwater. Threaded beneath centuries of conquest and concealment, its ink seeped into the bedrock of forbidden knowledge. You will not find it quoted in cathedral hymnals, but in whispered dreams, in glassy-eyed prophets, in cave-bound whispers carried on desert winds. It speaks still. So I ask you now, why do the sanctioned Gospels speak of giants in the land in Genesis 6:4 and then fall silent? Why does the Book of Enoch, once read by the early church fathers like Tertullian and even hinted at in Jude 1:14, vanish from the Western Bible? Why is the tale of angelic progeny, of hybrid ruin, of dreams foretelling judgment, consistently throttled, hidden, drowned? While other myths are sung from pulpits, because some truths do not serve empires, they serve memory. So the scrolls floated, over time, over doctrine, not eroded but erased, not forgotten but forbidden. And now, the waters have receded, the fragments remain. The Book of Giants is breathing again, and still they watch from below. They say Scripture ends where safety begins. But what of the texts that bled outside the margins? What of the words too wild, too electrifying to survive the scalpel of canon? The Book of Giants, Sefer HaGibborim, was one such exile, not erased by error but by design. Its bones lay broken beneath the scrolls of empire. Its breath, trapped in the vaults of desert caves, barely a whisper beneath the silence carved by centuries of fear. Fragments were found, not by chance but by persistence. Qumran 1947. The caves of the Dead Sea Scrolls coughed up their secrets, and nestled among them echoes of the giants. Gibborim born of the Watchers and the daughters of men whose towering appetites swallowed the earth in the days before the flood. Echoes traced back to the book of Enoch, 1 Enoch 7:2, where it is written, "And the women became pregnant and bare great giants, who consumed all the acquisitions of men." This was already a firebrand text kept alive only in the Ge'ez tradition of Ethiopia long after the church in Rome and the rabbis of Babylon turned their faces away. But the Book of Giants, it whispered even deeper crimes. It told of dreams, the giants haunted by visions of coming judgment. It told of Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, delivering messages of doom not just to men, but to the fallen spirits themselves. And it detailed a war in heaven's shadow not between nations but bloodlines. This was not allegory. The ancient scribes did not write myths. They recorded memory. Why then was this book tossed to ash? Why did fire claim its parchment? Why did decree wrap it in chains? Because power fears prophecy when it comes from the mouths of monsters. The Book of Giants suggests that divine judgment was not a moment but a pattern. That rebellion was not only spiritual, but biological, that some sins reshaped the very structure of creation. It stared directly at those who tampered with the divine blueprint and called them by name. That was too dangerous to canonize, too real, and so the order came down. Let the earth forget. Let the Watchers fade into metaphor. Let no tongue repeat what the ancients once knew beneath star and ruin. Yet the book did not die. It fragmented. It seeded. Manichaean sects in Central Asia carried versions in Middle Persian. Mani, the prophet condemned as heretic in both Rome and Persia, wrote his rendition of the Book of Giants into the heart of his cosmic dualism. The same giants, the same punishments. The names may shift, but the skeletal truth remained. These weren't myths carried through time. They were codes buried in the marrow of civilization, vibrating beneath temples turned to dust. Lines of the text survive not only in desert alcoves, but carved into the visions of dreamers embedded in the forgotten rituals of heretical Gnostics, mirrored in the ancient Zoroastrian concept of diva-born corruption. Threads of the same rebellion pulled through different tongues, different veils, buried but pulsing. What does it mean that the same beings, Oya, Ahia, and Mawe, surfaced again in texts a world away from the caves of Judea? What does it say about memory when even imperial censorship cannot hold back the echo of heaven's war crimes? This was never about mythology, it was about control. And now as these fragments reawaken from sand and silence, we must ask who ordained the forgetting, and why are we remembering now? And still they watch from below. They were cast down but not forgotten. The story did not end with the flood. It circled back, like thunder coughing in the bones of dry mountains, like a whisper tearing through the fabric of centuries. The children of wrath, they called them, in hushed corners of exilic lament. The Book of Giants was not just a relic, it was a wound, a cosmic scar, and those who dared to remember it were made exiles in their own time. You see, the Watchers were not simply punished, they were expelled, not annihilated but displaced. Their sentence was not death but distance. As recorded in the Book of Enoch, those celestial beings, once guardians of heaven's high order, found themselves chained beneath the jagged plates of the earth, staring upward through centuries of silence. And their children, the giants, were destroyed by divine decree, yes, but their memory proved far more resilient than the bodies left to rot beneath flood and fire. There is silence in Scripture where roar once dwelled, but listen closely. Beneath every suppression is a resonance. Fragments of the Book of Giants, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves, testify not only to a primordial past but to an ever-returning echo. Written in Aramaic, that tongue of exile and empire, they speak of dreams, nightmares really, haunting the offspring of angels. They speak of Mahweh, the giant who flies between realms seeking dream interpretation from none other than Enoch, the scribe of righteousness. They do not speak of monsters. They speak of mourners, condemned by inheritance. Each parchment trembles with the vibration of forbidden memory like stringed instruments strummed by unseen hands. And yet the Book of Giants was exiled too, not officially canonized, not permitted into the hallowed halls of institutional scripture, strategically left out by rabbinic councils and early Christian compilers alike, the very ones who codified the Hebrew Bible and forged the Nicene canon with fire-tempered pens. Why? Not because it was less true, but because it was too true, too ancient, too unruly. While Genesis 6:4 gives a whisper of giants in the earth in those days, the Book of Giants roars. It dares to name them, to trace them, to haunt the line between heaven and humanity. It reminds us that the line was once crossed, and the memory of that crossing was not permitted to remain. The exiled watchers mirror an exiled text, both cast down by a cosmos that could no longer tolerate rebellion, both bound by the spiritual gravity of forgotten crimes. Yet in Babylonian myth and Persian echoes, even in the Manichaean fragments from Turfan, thousands of miles east, the tale still unfurls. It migrates, it mutates, it refuses to vanish. The memory travels like incense smoke curling through burnt temples, unseen but ever inhaled. But silence was never just forgetfulness. It was engineered, imposed. The obliteration of the Book of Giants by fire, by decree, by the quiet scissors of editorial power was not to protect the faithful. It was to preserve the illusion that heaven and earth were never breached, that angels don't bleed, that no deeper ancestry haunts the blood of nations. Yet here we are. The fragments still breathe. The circle was never broken, only concealed. The code was not lost, only buried beneath layers of dogma and dust. So I ask you, this chosen soul scratching at the edge of remembrance, if exile was the punishment for sacred trespass, then what does it mean that these words still find us? Who is really in exile, them or us? And still, they watch from below. It was never a legend. It was a warning scattered in shards, sealed away in silence and set aflame in memory. The Book of Giants, a text so dangerous it was not destroyed in rage, but in deliberation. It was scorched not by ignorance, but by incision. Its ashes whisper beneath the sands of Qumran in scroll fragments too cautious to speak aloud. Once cradled within the libraries of sects like the Essenes, written in Aramaic, buried in cave one of the Dead Sea's hallowed cliffs. It was never part of Israel's canon, but it was part of its crisis. The church never claimed it. The rabbis outwalked it. The empire ignored it with force, because it remembered too much. This was not a book that drifted into obscurity. It was shepherded there by decree, locked beneath theological firewalls and imperial doctrine. You'll find no direct citation in the Talmud, no public reading in synagogues of the Second Temple, no acceptance in Nicene councils. And yet it existed. Oh, how it existed. It spoke in the same breath as Enoch, that ancient scribe who walked with God and was no more. It told of the Watchers, the Grigori, those luminous beings descended to the plane of men, who looked upon the daughters of earth and begot a hybrid race of giants. It told what happened next. It rose alongside the texts of one Enoch found in the same caves, a sister scripture, a darker mirror. While one Enoch survived in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, the Book of Giants did not get so lucky. Its curse was specificity. While Genesis 6 mentions the Nephilim in veiled brevity, the Book of Giants names names. Mahweh the giant who rides the cosmic winds to consult Enoch. Ahia and Hahia, cursed spawn of Shemiheza, dreaming and dying in the shadow of heaven's decree. It speaks of dreams too violent for dogma and revelations too aligned with forbidden cosmologies. These weren't just monsters. They were metaphors baked in blood. The Manichaeans tried to preserve it. Yes, centuries later in the hands of Mani, the mystic of 3rd century Persia fragments reappeared in Middle Persian. Mani gave them harbor, interpreting the giants as prefigurations of spiritual bondage. Yet even then it clashed with orthodoxy. Church fathers like Augustine condemned Manichaeism as heresy. The fire returned. Empires purged scroll after scroll. In China, fragments were buried beneath Uyghur monasteries. In Qumran, they lay in bone-dry stillness. And all the while, a silence grew among scholars, not from ignorance but from engineered forgetting. Scribes were told to look away. Origins were recast in parables, and wherever the truth bled through it was called myth. The watchers fell, yes, but their memory was buried deeper than their bones, entombed beneath the veils of liturgy and cultural domestication, not just in vaults but in our very language. What was once thunder became metaphor, what was once tremor became allegory. They didn't erase the truth, they buried it beneath belief. And now you are hearing the echo, in the trembling beneath familiar scripture, in the vibration behind a dream you couldn't shake. You are touching residue that has waited lifetimes to stir. Why? Why now? What ancient chord is striking again in the marrow of history? What kind of world must be emerging if even the giants are waking from sleep? The scroll was never sealed. It was hidden. And the question has never been, was it real? The question is, why were we never meant to remember it? And still, they watch from below.